what is the true price of rewriting world geography?
I mean, what happens when that kind of human ambition, this incredible desire to slice a passage straight through a continent?
Collides head-on with political chaos, with financial ruin, and with just deadly endemic disease.
That's the story of the Panama Canal. It's this decades-long global effort to carve a path through the Americas.
And it is one of the most powerful and often brutal stories of modern history.
And the book that really puts you right in the middle of that whole 44-year struggle from the 1870s to 1914 is David McCullough's masterpiece, The Path Between the Seas.
It's just such a sweeping narrative. It covers everything from deep-sea surveys to global finance and even the surprising invention of modern tropical medicine.
It really does.
Today, we're going to be taking a unique, extended look at this book. We want you to discover a new, in-depth approach to book coverage with this extended summary.
That's right. Unlike our previous reviews, which offer a more focused analysis, this feature delivers a really comprehensive overview.
We'll be tracing the intellectual roots, the key arguments, and the real-world impact of the subject.
And if you appreciate this expanded format and find it helpful, please let us know. Your feedback is really going to help shape our future content.
And just so you know, you are experiencing a unique two-host AI conversation powered by Google's Notebook LM for deeper, more dynamic book summaries.
So our mission today is a chronological journey into this incredible piece of narrative nonfiction.
We're going to focus on how these interwoven stories of politics, engineering, disease control, and finance all had to come together to make this incredible feat of construction succeed.
But only after one spectacular, absolutely devastating failure.
Let's start there. In the 1870s, it was a time of, well, this widespread optimism that feels almost unimaginable today.
It really does. And before Panama was even the final choice, surveyors were looking at multiple routes. Nicaragua was a serious contender.
But the international focus shifted, and it shifted decisively because of one massive, recent, global success.
The Suez Canal?
Exactly. And the man who made that happen, Ferdinand de Lesseps, he immediately became the central figure, the global champion for the Panama Project.
His reputation alone was enough to launch the whole thing, the Compagnie Universelle du Canal Interoceanique de Panama.
And he did it with immense fanfare. We're talking massive share subscriptions from the French public. They completely bought into his vision.
His prestige was absolute, and he used every bit of it to sell a very specific, unwavering idea.
A pure sea-level canal.
That was his dream. He campaigned tirelessly for it, arguing it was the simplest solution. Just a straight trench, ocean to ocean, with no need for complex mechanics like locks.
It sounds so beautifully straightforward on paper. So why was that specific vision, the sea-level approach, so fundamentally impossible in Panama? It worked in Suez.
And that is the key insight the French just failed to grasp. Suez was mostly flat, low-lying desert, easy digging.
Panama is not that.
Not at all. Panama is defined by the Continental Divide, a literal spine of mountains, and just extreme hydrology. The isthmus gets these torrential, unpredictable rains that turn the Chagres River into a raging, uncontrollable force.
So a simple ditch.
A simple sea-level ditch would have been impossible to manage against that constant massive flooding. And the sheer scale of mountain they had to remove was just monumental.
And then there were the immediate physical conditions. McCullough vividly details the dense tropical jungle, the intense heat.
And that unstable volcanic soil, the ground was just prone to collapse.
But even those visible engineering challenges were completely overshadowed by the invisible disaster.
The real horror was the human toll. Yellow fever and malaria just decimated the workforce and the leadership.
And the French operated for years under this complete misconception that the disease was caused by bad air or miasma.
Right, so they spent money trying to filter the air, improve food, but they entirely missed the real enemy, the mosquito, which was thriving in all the standing water around their own barracks and hospitals.
The statistics the book lays out are just brutal.
They are. Despite all the cubic yards of earth they removed and the incredible machinery they brought in, the relentless attrition from death and illness meant the project was always running backwards.
You can't run a project like that without stable labor. The loss of morale, the financial woes, it all started to mount.
And what's fascinating is that even as this brutal reality was setting in, the shift away from that simple sea-level concept toward the necessary lock-based approach, it just came too late.
And it was implemented unevenly when it did come.
Exactly. The colossal French failure finally culminated in bankruptcy and a political scandal that rocked Paris, leaving behind mountains of rusting, incomplete works.
And a terrible legacy of graveyards.
So enter the Americans. After that French catastrophe, the United States, which had recently flexed its muscle in the Spanish-American War, was now intensely focused on naval strategy.
They realized that linking the Atlantic and Pacific was a strategic imperative. It was about global power projection.
So the debate in Washington immediately sharpened. Do we commit to the Nicaraguan route, which had its own advocates and was maybe geographically less volatile?
Or do we acquire the massive infrastructure and the canal rights that the French had already put in place in Panama?
And this is where the lobbying and the political maneuvering becomes so crucial to the narrative.
McCullough really highlights these key figures,
Mm.
most notably the French engineer Philippe Bounavaria.
He aggressively campaigned in Washington for the Panama route. He had a vested financial interest in them buying the French assets, and he played the political game brilliantly.
So American negotiators engaged with Colombia, which controlled the Isthmus of Panama at the time. They needed a treaty for the construction rights.
But those negotiations just stalled completely. Colombian politics objected to the terms. They wanted more money, and they wanted to retain more sovereignty than the U.S. was willing to give up.
And that diplomatic impasse was the trigger.
It was. The sequence of events that follows is so fast and so deeply consequential.
You have political activists and local elites in Panama, and they recognize the U.S. strategic interest, so they start moving swiftly toward independence.
The narrative clearly shows the step-by-step process. I mean, while the separatist movement in Panama was genuine, it was the strategic presence of the U.S. Navy and this rapid diplomatic maneuvering.
That's what ensured the new state's success against any Colombian opposition.
It was essentially a revolution facilitated by an external power.
So that's the core question, isn't it?
Yeah.
The one that makes this history so compelling. Was the Panamanian Revolution a genuine grassroots movement, or was it a calculated transaction engineered by U.S. interests?
McCullough presents a sophisticated view. The local elites did want autonomy, but the outcome was only secured because of that U.S. commitment to prevent Colombia from intervening.
And the immediate consequence was a treaty with the new Republic of Panama.
A treaty granting the United States broad, autonomous rights over the Canal Zone, the territory they needed to finally build the canal.
That single political act, the effective creation of a new sovereign state just to facilitate an infrastructure project, it just highlights the immense power dynamics at play back then.
It really does. It encourages you to reflect on that complex relationship between global ambition and local sovereignty.
And that kind of deep dive into the why behind historical events is exactly what we strive for.
Speaking of digging into complex narratives, if you find this kind of detailed synthesis inspiring, you should check out our YouTube channel, Mindful Moments.
It offers AI book analysis, summaries, and critiques, all designed to inspire reflection and rational thought.
It's also incredibly valuable for aspiring authors who are looking to understand how to craft compelling, complex, nonfiction narratives.
Huh.
I mean, seeing how McCullough weaves together all these political, medical, and engineering threads is a masterclass.
Okay, so with the political foundation laid and the canal zone secured, the American construction phase began in 1904. But it did not start smoothly.
Not at all. The first American chief engineer, John F. Wallace, he struggled immensely.
He ran right into organizational confusion, constant second-guessing from Washington bureaucracy, and just major supply bottlenecks.
Well, the French had left behind mountains of broken-down equipment. Wallace just couldn't impose order or create stable living conditions for his new workforce.
The sanitation and housing were grossly inadequate. It all led to his eventual frustration and his resignation.
The real fundamental turnaround came with his replacement, John Stevens.
Stevens was a renowned railroad engineer, and his genius was not in digging, but in logistics. He understood that this wasn't an engineering problem yet.
Right. It was a management and a movement problem.
Stevens completely recentered the project around what became known as the railroad era of the canal. He famously said, "The digging is the least part of the job."
And he meant it. He prioritized infrastructure first. Robust worker housing, reliable supply chains, and most crucially, a railroad system that was capable of moving millions of tons of excavated material efficiently.
So his focus on logistics meant reorganizing the whole operation. New track systems, sidings, rolling stock, or literally maximizing the efficiency of the rail cars hauling the dirt away.
We are talking about spoil disposal. Just moving the excavated dirt, the spoil, away from the active digging area. When you're carving through a mountain, that is half the work. Stevens made it look deceptively simple.
He was also the one who firmly pushed for the permanent adoption of the lock canal design.
He saw the geological instability and the Chagres River issues firsthand and just realized that trying to maintain a sea level cut was madness.
And the lock system, which lifts ships over the continental divide with these huge chambers, it drastically reduced the amount of excavation needed, and it created the stable Gatun Lake.
But even the most brilliant logistics would have ultimately failed without the stunning success of the medical campaign.
Led by Chief Sanitary Officer William Gorgas, a U.S. Army physician. This is the critical piece the French missed entirely.
Gorgas faced immense challenges. Not least of which was convincing his own superiors and the budget office that his plan to fight an invisible enemy was even necessary.
He applied the relatively new scientific knowledge about mosquito transmission to yellow fever and malaria.
And his campaign was total war against their breeding grounds. This wasn't just some rudimentary bug control.
It was a systematic, aggressive public health intervention. They screened every single building. They drained every pool and ditch of standing water.
They meticulously fumigated entire towns with sulfur. It was a complete reversal of the French approach. They focused on the carrier, not the supposed bad air.
The success was dramatic. Yellow fever was effectively eradicated from the Canal Zone within a year of Gorgas getting the funding and authority he needed.
Malaria rates dropped precipitously. This medical miracle materially changed the viability of the entire project. It transformed the deadly isthmus into a stable environment where a long-term labor force could finally operate.
So, with Stevens laying the logistical groundwork and Gorgas's conquering disease, the final construction stage began.
Under Lieutenant Colonel George W. Goethals of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, Goethals centralized decision-making and brought a very rigid, hierarchical military style of command.
But he also brought an insightful management style. McCullough highlights his famous public office hours.
Every Sunday morning, he made himself accessible to anyone, from the lowliest worker to a senior engineer, to hear grievances directly. And that level of disciplined, accountable management, it fostered immense loyalty.
Under his command, the project intensified. They deployed larger, more specialized machinery and refined the designs of the massive concrete locks and dams,
which remain engineering marvels to this day.
Yet, even with all that organization and medical control, the true central drama was still the Culebra Cut.
That was the deepest excavation, where crews had to carve straight through the continental divide itself.
This was just a continuous existential battle against geology.
The immense pressure from the slopes on either side of the cut caused these massive, unpredictable landslides that would repeatedly undo months of work. The earth just would not stay put.
The slides frequently buried tracks, steam shovels, even entire sections of the canal floor. It forced the engineers to constantly rethink the slope angles and the sheer volume of spoil they had to remove.
It was a terrifying reality where natural forces regularly just mocked human effort.
And throughout this whole American phase, the book details the complex multinational workforce. They were drawn from the U.S., the Caribbean, Europe, Latin America.
And this created the deeply structured inequality of the gold roll and silver roll system.
The system was rigid and strictly segregated. The gold roll was mainly for skilled white American and European staff. They got higher pay, better housing, better benefits.
And the silver roll was for the manual laborers, mostly West Indians and other lower wage workers, who faced segregated commissaries, segregated housing, and far, far worse pay scales.
So while the Americans created this incredible infrastructure company towns, state-of-the-art hospitals, the underlying hierarchy and segregation persisted in every detail of daily life,
which led to constant underlying tension and labor issues right beneath that administrative facade.
As the book concludes, the entire story from 1870 all the way to 1914 is this stunning example of technological ambition just colliding with reality.
The core takeaway is the immense scope of the project and that critical interdependence of public health and massive infrastructure. Engineering, medicine, finance, government, they all must align for something like this to succeed.
It's a synthesis of systems. And the narrative leaves you with a profound realization about the political calculus that was required. The canal, in the end, required the U.S. to help facilitate a revolution.
To create a new sovereign state, Panama, simply to secure unencumbered rights for a construction zone.
So what does the necessity of actively facilitating that revolution imply about the nature of U.S. power and international law in the early 20th century?
That political context, that provides a really potent thread for rational further inquiry that continues to define the region even today.
Click the link on screen for the in-depth book critique. Subscribe, share, purchase via link, and think rationally.
See the many genre-based book podcasts at Mindful Moments. Subscribe and nourish your mind on the go.